Have you ever noticed this? You try to help someone and they push back. They deflect, justify, blame, even when your feedback could spare them pain. It's one of the more frustrating aspects of leadership and love. Why would anyone reject guidance that might ease their suffering? That's what this talk is about. Some time ago, I sat with a friend whose once carefree life was spiraling, as so often happens in midlife. And as I gently offered a way through his pain, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I don't want to know." That sentence stuck with me. And ever since, I've assumed that people don't want to know because unsolicited feedback often feels like an attack. Why is that? Because most people live in their heads. That's where the ego lives. And the ego's deepest fear is being wrong. Why? Because its entire world is built on mental models. Challenge the model and you threaten its perception of reality. Letting go of a model isn't just uncomfortable, it feels like death to the ego. And that's why feedback can feel like a personal insult. But like it or not, the truth is, much of your suffering is self-made. Not because you're bad or broken, but because the part of you running the show, your ego, is trying to protect you rather than evolve you. So what breaks that spell? Well, it begins with a growth mindset, one that overrides the ego's impulses to defend and instead chooses curiosity. That's the beginning of wisdom. The shift from a closed-minded victim to an open-minded learner, one who sees life not as something happening to them, but as an exquisitely tailored curriculum designed for their evolution. Until you learn to perceive life this way, you remain trapped in Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But there's another obstacle, and that's pride. Because to change means admitting you've been doing it wrong, that you build a life that doesn't actually work. And that requires humility, a virtue in short supply today. Most people won't embrace transformation until life humbles them first, until staying the same costs more than changing. You come to understand, while you'd never wish it for another, when it comes, suffering is a form of grace. Because without it, there's no reason to evolve. And when that moment of self-doubt finally arrives, guidance is no longer resisted. It's actually welcomed. It doesn't take much to help someone grow once they've had enough of their own story. At that point, feedback feels like manna from heaven. But until then, it's often felt as a slap. And that's why the great traditions like Zen teach non-attachment, not just to outcomes or possessions, but to your own opinions, your point of view. Because only with beginner's mind, the humility to say, "I don't know," can you truly grow. That's why when I decide who I work with as a coach, I look for two things. First, they're yearning for something beyond more mere accolades. They want clarity, vitality, a deeper sense of meaning and freedom. But secondly, and just as importantly, they've truly had enough of life as it is. Because until the pain becomes intolerable, most people choose to stay trapped in their patterns. They want one more sip of their story. And sometimes that sip even still tastes like pleasure. But wisdom understands that pleasure is a kind of trap, the kind that borrows joy from tomorrow to numb the emptiness of today. And you can tell someone this, but until they're ready, they won't hear you. And that's okay, as long as you don't become their rescuer. Because in the end, people always save themselves. That's why giving feedback in relationships is so tricky. You care enough to speak the truth, but their ego doesn't always hear it that way. even the most loving words can land as criticism. That's why it takes courage to speak honestly and humility to receive truth with an open heart. But until the ego has been humbled, often many times, that kind of openness is rare. So sometimes the most powerful act of love isn't intervention, it's withdrawal. To quietly step back and let your absence do the talking. Just like Gandhi practiced nonviolence, you can practice non-interference, because your job is not to save people. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. So life can teach them what your words never could. Never stand between another person and the consequences of their actions. So this is the gift of detachment, removing your energy from their melodrama so it has nothing left to feed on. And this is actually how real transformation begins. Not when someone's told what to do, but when they feel the cost of not doing it. Only then do they finally say, enough. Enough of the same choices, enough of the same outcomes, enough of my own pain. And in that moment, they become ready, finally, to face the truth that much of their suffering was self-made, and to take responsibility for what they choose next. So if you've been the rescuer, the fixer, the one who always sees the truth first, you know how painful it is to watch someone stay stuck. But you're not here to save them, because the wisest thing you can do is to put your own mask on first. So if something in you is ready to shift from over-functioning to deep trust, from burnout to clarity, from knowing better to living wiser, then you'll find everything you need at resonance.global. Trust what resonates, and thank you.